H1. Human stepped onto a low-gravity moon. The aliens thought he was rising to attack. H1. Part 1. First contact on Vela 9. HR. The ship came down slow. The Iron Mark was not a beautiful vessel. It was wide and flat and gray, built for function and not for looks. It had scorch marks along its lower hull from 3 previous landings on 3 different worlds. Its engines groaned when they fired and hissed when they cooled. It was the kind of ship that made engineers proud and artists look away. But it landed perfectly on Vela 9, touching the pale silver dust of the moon's surface without even a tremor. Inside the ship, Lieutenant Do-hyun was pulling on his boots. He was not a particularly tall man. He had short black hair, a round face, and the kind of calm eyes that made people think he was either very wise or very sleepy. Most of the time, it was the second one. He had been awake for 19 hours preparing for this landing, reviewing gravity data, surface pressure readings, atmospheric density reports, and about 400 other documents that his commanding officer had forwarded to him with the note, "Read these before you step off the ship." He had read maybe half of them. "Gravity is 0.18, said Yuna from the communication station behind him. She was the ship's xenolinguist. She had neat hair pulled back from her face and a habit of tapping her fingers on her desk when she was nervous. She was tapping now. "That's less than a fifth of Earth gravity, Do-hyun. You need to move carefully." "I know," he said. "I mean it. Every step you take will feel light. You'll want to move normally, but if you push off even a little too hard, you'll go up too far." "I know, Yuna. I'm serious. I watched the footage from the Ganymede mission. That one soldier sneezed and hit the ceiling of the airlock." Do-hyun looked at her. "That's not true." "It might be true." He smiled, checked the seal on his suit, and walked toward the cargo ramp. The ramp lowered slowly, and for the first time, Vela 9's surface was visible from inside the ship. It was pale and quiet and vast. The dust was almost white, the color of old bone, and it stretched out in all directions, under a sky that was deep purple at the horizon and black above. The gas giant the moon orbited, a massive orange and brown striped giant the mission team called Big Drum, hung in the upper sky, enormous and still, its rings catching light from the distant star and throwing long silver lines across the darkness. It was, Do-hyun had to admit, one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. He stood at the top of the ramp for a moment, just looking. Then he stepped off. His first step on Vela 9 was careful. His boot pressed into the dust and left a clean print. The surface was firm beneath the powder. He felt the difference in gravity immediately. There was almost no weight pulling him down. He felt like he was walking on the surface of a swimming pool, like at any moment he might simply drift upward if he breathed too deeply. He took another step, then another. Behind him, the rest of the ground team began descending the ramp. There were 6 of them in total, all in gray-white suits with the UN crest on the shoulder. They moved slowly, carefully, the way Yuna had told them to. One of the younger crew members, a field technician named Bora, took one step too quickly and rose about 30 centimeters off the ground before drifting back down. She made a quiet sound of surprise. The others watched her land, and then looked at each other and said nothing. Do-hyun walked forward, away from the ship, toward the open ground. He did not know they were being watched. On a long ridge of gray rock, about 400 meters to the east, the Veth were standing very still. There were about 40 of them visible on the ridge, though more waited behind it. They were tall. The shortest among them stood nearly 2.5 meters, and they were covered in small, overlapping scales, the color of dark stone. Their eyes were large and set wide on their flat faces, built for seeing movement at great distances. They had 4 limbs, 2 of which they used to stand, and 2 of which ended in long fingers, that currently held long, thin weapons against their bodies. The Veth had been on Vela 9 for 300 years. They had built a small research station on the moon's far side, and used this surface for resource gathering and scientific study. They had received signals from the approaching human vessel 6 days ago, and had debated for all 6 of those days about what to do. Some had argued for leaving. Some had argued for attacking the ship before it landed. In the end, Commander Rena had ordered her people to stay and watch. Rena stood at the center of the ridge, slightly ahead of the others. She was older than most of her soldiers. The scales along her jaw had faded to a lighter gray, and one of her left side fingers had been broken years ago and had healed at a slight angle. She had served the Veth High Council for 30 years. She had seen 3 small conflicts and 1 full war. She was not easily frightened, but she was watching the human with very careful eyes. The creature from the ship was small by Veth standards, almost surprisingly small. The Veth had studied human biology from intercepted transmissions over the past decade, and they knew humans were not large beings. But seeing one in person, standing on the surface of Vela 9 in its gray suit, it seemed almost fragile. Almost. Rena watched it step away from the ship. She watched its movement, slow, deliberate, testing the ground. She knew from her science teams that Vela 9's gravity was far lower than what humans were built for. She understood this logically. What she was not prepared for was what the human did next. Do-hyun, having walked about 50 meters from the ship, stopped and looked around. He rolled his shoulders. He took a breath, and then, without thinking about it, the way a person stretches after sitting too long, he shifted his weight and took one easy, relaxed step forward, and rose 1.5 meters into the air. He hung there for a moment, arms loose at his sides, completely calm, before drifting back down to the dust. He just landed, found his footing, and kept walking. On the ridge, none of the Veth moved. Rena stared. Her second-in-command, a younger officer named Teo, leaned close to her and said very quietly, "Did you see that?" "Yes," she said. "It jumped." "Yes. Without weapons, without armor. It just jumped." Rena said nothing. She kept her eyes on the small human figure, moving across the pale dust of Vela 9, leaving footprints in the white powder, completely unaware that 40 sets of alien eyes were tracking his every move. She clicked her communicator once, the signal to her soldiers to hold their positions, and she kept watching. Something told her, deep in a part of her brain that had kept her ancestors alive on a very dangerous world for a very long time, that this was a moment that needed to be handled with great care. She did not yet know how right she was. H1. Humans stepped onto a low-gravity moon. The aliens thought he was rising to attack. H2. Part 2. The misread motion. HR. Rena did not lower her weapon. She had not raised it either, which was already more restraint than most of her soldiers expected from her in a first-contact situation. But she kept her hand near it. She kept her eyes on the human. And she kept very, very still, because in her experience, when something you did not understand began moving in ways that made no sense, the worst thing you could do was react before you knew what you were reacting to. The human was walking again. It had landed from that first strange jump as if nothing had happened. No stumble, no panic, no look around to check if anyone had seen. It simply came back down to the dust and kept moving forward, its steps slow and easy, its arms swinging gently at its sides. It reminded Rena of the way young Veth children walked when they were learning. Careful, yes, but not afraid of falling, like the ground was something they trusted completely. She found that strange. The Veth respected the ground because the ground could kill you. Veth homeworld had terrain that would crack open without warning, sinkholes that swallowed entire survey teams, ravines that dropped for hundreds of meters with no bottom visible from above. The Veth had learned, over thousands of years of surviving such a world, that the ground was not your friend. It was something you studied and respected and moved across with great attention. This human moved like the ground was furniture. Behind her, she heard Teo shifting. His scales made a faint dry sound when he moved, a sound she had learned to read over the years. That particular shift meant he was uncomfortable. Not afraid, just uncertain. Teo was good at staying calm, which was one of the reasons she had kept him as her second for 11 years. But uncertain was close enough to afraid when the situation was new enough. "What is it doing?" he asked quietly. "Walking," she said. "Just walking?" "Just walking." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why did it jump like that?" "I don't know yet." Down on the surface, the human had stopped again. This time it crouched, lowering its body slowly toward the dust, reaching one gloved hand down toward the ground. From the ridge, it looked like it was pressing its fingers into the surface, testing it. Rena watched the motion carefully. She recognized it. She had seen her own scouts do the same thing on unfamiliar terrain, feeling the ground, checking the density, learning what they were standing on. She relaxed, very slightly. Not a warrior's. Then the human stood back up. And this time, when it rose, it did not simply stand. It straightened fast, knees pushing, back lifting, the way a Veth soldier would rise when launching from a crouch into a fighting stance. The motion was quick, decisive, and because Velanine's gravity was less than a fifth of what the human body was built for, the simple act of standing up sharply sent it rising nearly a full meter off the ground before gravity caught it again and brought it back down. To Do-hyun, it felt like standing up too fast, a little floaty, nothing unusual given the gravity numbers he'd been briefed on. To Rena, it looked like a combat movement. She had spent 30 years training soldiers and studying enemy behavior. She knew what a fighting stance looked like. She knew what a controlled leap looked like. She knew what it meant when a creature crouched, coiled, and then rose fast, because that was what her people did when they were about to close distance on a target. You lowered yourself to build force. Then you launched. The human had just done exactly that. Her hand moved to her weapon. Around her, she heard the quiet sound of 40 other hands doing the same thing. The Veth were a disciplined people. They did not fire without orders. But they were also a people who had survived by reading threat signals correctly. And every instinct in every soldier on that ridge was reading the same thing. "It is preparing." Teo's voice was very low now. "Commander." "I see it," she said. "It's not looking at us. That doesn't mean it doesn't know we're here." She had a point, and they both knew it. Some of the most dangerous predators on the Veth homeworld hunted without ever looking directly at their prey. They used peripheral vision, sound, vibration through the ground. You didn't know you were being hunted until you were already caught. The fact that this human had not once looked toward the ridge did not mean it was unaware of them. It could mean the opposite. Down on the surface, Do-hyun had pulled a small instrument from the pack on his side. It looked from the ridge like a handheld device of some kind. He held it out in front of him and moved it slowly left and right, sweeping it across the landscape. Rena's grip tightened. A scanner. He was mapping them. He was recording their positions while pretending not to see them, gathering tactical information before. Actually, it was a soil spectrometer. Do-hyun was checking mineral content in the top layer of the moon's surface because the geology team had specifically asked him to run a quick surface scan on his way out. And he had told them he would, and he was the kind of man who kept his word, even about small things. He had no idea there was anyone on the ridge. He swept the spectrometer left, then right. Then he looked down at the reading, frowned slightly. The iron content was higher than expected, and tapped the screen twice to run the scan again. On the ridge, 40 soldiers watched the human point its device in their direction, hold it steady for several seconds, then tap it deliberately. "Targeting system," said one of the soldiers behind Rena. Her name was Somi, and she was young and very good at her job, and she was currently wrong about almost everything she thought she was seeing. "Quiet," Rena said, but she had thought the same thing. She clicked her communicator, 2 short signals this time. The meaning was clear to everyone on the ridge. "Weapons ready. Do not fire. Wait for my order." She heard the low hum of pulse lances charging along the line. The sound was barely audible, but it was there, a faint electric whisper beneath the silence of the moon. Dohun finished his scan, tucked the spectrometer back into his pack, stretched his arms above his head, rising briefly onto his toes and lifting a few centimeters off the dust in the process, and then turned around to walk back toward the ship. He was humming something. Rena could not hear it from the ridge, but she could see his helmet moving slightly. Whatever the human was doing with its sound-producing organ, it was doing it casually, without any apparent concern for its surroundings, without any sign that it recognized the ridge of armed soldiers it had just scanned, without any indication at all that it understood the degree to which it was currently being aimed at. Either it was completely unaware, or it was the most controlled creature she had ever encountered. Teo leaned in again. His voice was barely a breath. "It's walking back toward the ship. Do we follow?" Rena watched Dohyun's easy, bouncing walk, every third step carrying him just a little too high, just a little too long, and she made a decision. "We wait." She lowered her hand from her weapon. Very slowly, after a moment, the soldiers around her did the same. The human walked back to its ship without looking back once, and Rena stood on the ridge and watched it go and felt, for the first time in a very long career, that she was not entirely sure who was in the more dangerous position. Humans stepped onto a low-gravity moon. The aliens thought he was rising to attack. Part 3. Panic in the Delegation. Yuna heard everything. That was her job. She sat at the communication station inside the Iron Mark, with 3 different receiver arrays running at the same time, each one tuned to a different frequency band. The Veth signals had started coming in the moment the ship landed, faint at first, almost like static. But she had been studying Veth communication patterns for 8 months, and she knew the difference between noise and language. The Veth were talking. She had been transcribing as fast as she could, cross-referencing against the partial Veth dictionary that the UN Sino-Linguistics Division had put together from intercepted transmissions over the past decade. It was not a complete dictionary. There were gaps, words she didn't know, grammatical patterns she still wasn't certain about. But she had enough. She had more than enough. She read the transcription on her screen and felt her stomach drop. The small creature rises again. It coils before striking. This is consistent with aggressive preparation. Then, from a different voice, lower and calmer. "Hold your positions. We observe." And then, from a third voice, "It pointed a device at our line. It is mapping us." Yuna pushed back from her desk so fast her chair rolled into the wall behind her. She grabbed her headset and switched to the ground team channel. Dohyun, stop moving. Stop whatever you're doing. Stop doing it right now." There was a pause. Then his voice came through, easy and unbothered. "I'm just walking back to the ship." "Don't bounce." Another pause. "Don't bounce?" "Every time you jump in the low gravity, they think you're attacking them. There are Veth on the eastern ridge, about 400 meters from your position. There have been this whole time. I've been picking up their communications. They're armed, and they think your movements are aggressive." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. "How many?" he said. His voice had changed. Not panicked, Do-hyun didn't really do panic, but focused now. A different kind of attention behind the words. At least 40 visible on the ridge. I don't know how many behind it. Do-hyun, they called your soil scanner a targeting system. My soil scanner. The spectrometer. When you swept it toward the ridge, they thought you were locking on to their positions. Another pause. She could hear him breathing. And the jumping. The jumping looks like a combat crouch and launch to them. Their biology is built for standard gravity. They have no context for what low-gravity movement looks like on a human. From where they're standing, every time you rise off the ground, you look like you're initiating an attack. She heard a quiet sound that she was almost certain was him suppressing a laugh. She pressed her fingers to her temple. Do-hyun, this is not funny. No, I know, it's not funny. I'm just... He stopped. Okay, I'm walking slowly. No bouncing. What do I do? Keep moving toward the ship. Slow steps. Don't raise your arms. Don't crouch. Don't make any sudden movements. When you get back inside, we need to figure out how to open communication with them before this gets worse. Is it getting worse? She looked at her screen. A new line of transcription had just appeared. The creature moves back toward its vessel. Perhaps it prepares to return with others. And below that, from Rena's voice. She had identified Rena's voice early on. It was lower than the others, and always a little slower. The careful cadence of someone choosing words deliberately. Or, it has completed its assessment, and does not consider us a threat worth engaging. Then Teo. Is that better or worse? Rena, after a pause. I am not certain. It's getting worse, Yuna told Do-hyun. But slowly. The commander seems to be keeping control of the situation. Get back to the ship. She heard his footsteps through the suit mic. Careful now, measured, and she turned back to her station and kept transcribing. Behind her, Captain Hyun-soo had come out of his office. He was a big man with a gray streak in his hair, and an expression that tended to look either thoughtful or annoyed. And right now, it was somewhere between the two. He had been listening from the doorway. How long have they been there? He asked. Since before we landed, I think, Yuna said. Maybe before we entered orbit. They knew we were coming. And they didn't leave. No. And they didn't fire. No, sir. He crossed his arms and looked at her screen. What does that tell you? Yuna thought about it for a moment. They're curious. Or they're following orders from someone who's curious. The commander, I'm calling her Rena, based on what the others are calling her. She's been holding her people back every time someone makes a move for their weapons. She keeps saying, observe, wait, hold. She's not looking for a fight. But her people are scared. Her people are very scared. They just don't understand what they're looking at. We look wrong to them. We move wrong. Everything Do-hyun did out there looked threatening from their side, and he was doing absolutely nothing threatening. He was collecting rock samples and humming. Hyun-soo made a sound. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was close. What was he humming? Hyun-soo asked. I don't know. Something with a lot of notes. The captain rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Yuna had seen him do this before. It meant he was thinking through multiple problems at the same time and arranging them in order. He had a good mind for that, for seeing all the pieces of a situation and figuring out which one to move first. Can you establish a signal? He asked. Something they can receive. Not language, not yet. Just something that says, we know you're there and we're not hostile. I can try. I've been building a phonetic model from their transmissions. It's rough, but I might be able to produce tones that match their communication frequencies. Not words, but rhythm. Something that reads as deliberate and non-aggressive. Do it. She was already turning back to her station. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and Do-hyun came in, pulling his helmet off. His hair was slightly damp, and he had the expression of a man who had just learned that a casual afternoon walk had nearly started an interstellar incident. "So," he said. "So," Yuna said without looking up. 40 of them, at least. And they thought I was attacking them. Yes. He leaned against the wall next to her station. She could feel him looking at the transcription on her screen. He read quietly for a moment. She kept working. Then he said very quietly, "It does kind of look like a combat crouch from that angle, doesn't it?" Yuna stopped typing. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the screen with a small, thinking expression. Not embarrassed, not worried. Just turning it over in his head, the way he turned everything over, looking at it from all sides. "I'm going back out," he said. "Absolutely not. Not to do anything, just to stand there. If I go back out and stand still and don't do anything threatening, that's a message too. That says, I know you're watching, and I'm not afraid, and I'm not here to fight." Yuna thought about it. She hated that it made sense. "You walk," she said, "slowly. You do not jump, bounce, crouch, stretch, raise your arms, sweep any instruments, or hum. What if I have to sneeze?" "Hold it." He nodded, picked his helmet back up, and headed for the ramp. On the ridge, Rena watched the human come back out of the ship. It moved differently this time. Careful, measured, 1 foot, then the other, staying close to the ground. And it stopped about 30 meters from the ship and simply stood there, facing east, facing the ridge. Teo said nothing for a long moment. Then, "It knows we're here." "Yes," Rena said. "It knew the whole time." "Possibly." She stared at the small still figure standing in the pale dust, not moving, not raising its weapons, not doing anything at all, except existing in the open and letting itself be seen. She had a feeling this was some kind of message. She just wasn't sure yet what it said. H1. Humans stepped onto a low-gravity moon. The aliens thought he was rising to attack. H2. Part 4. The human doesn't notice. HR. Do-hyun stood still for 11 minutes. He counted them. He had a timer running in the corner of his helmet display, a small green number ticking upward in the lower right of his visor. He watched it pass 5 minutes, then 8, then 10. His legs were starting to feel slightly odd from standing completely motionless in low gravity, a kind of loose, floaty sensation like standing on a boat. But he did not shift his weight. He did not scratch his nose, even though his nose, with all the patience of a nose that sensed an opportunity, had begun to itch badly, somewhere around the 6-minute mark. He just stood there and looked at the ridge. The ridge looked back. He couldn't see them clearly. They were 400 meters away, and their coloring matched the dark gray rock well enough that if he hadn't known they were there, he probably still would have missed them. But he knew, so he could pick out the shapes if he looked carefully. Tall, still, lined along the ridge like fence posts, except fence posts didn't hold weapons. He had not told the teen he could see the weapons. There was no point in worrying them more than they already were. Inside the ship, Yuna's voice came through his earpiece. "I've got a signal ready. Tonal pattern, their frequency range, nothing that translates to language. Just a repeating sequence. 12 beats, then a pause, then 12 again. Nothing in their communication library matches it as a threat signal. I think it'll read as deliberate, intentional, like someone knocking on a door instead of kicking it." "Send it," he said, without moving his mouth very much. He heard nothing, obviously. The signal was going out through the ship's array. But 30 seconds later, something happened on the ridge. The shapes shifted. Just slightly. Just a small movement running along the line from one end to the other, like a slow wave. He had seen humans do the same thing when something unexpected happened in a crowd. That small physical ripple of collective surprise. They'd heard it. He kept standing still. "They're responding," Yuna said. Her voice had a new edge to it, Not fear, but the particular tension of someone watching something very important happen in real time. It's not language yet. It's a rhythm. They're matching it, sending back 12 beats. Then, 12. They're answering. Yes. He felt something warm move through his chest. It wasn't excitement exactly. It was something quieter than that. Something like the feeling of two people nodding at each other across a crowded room. A small recognition. A moment of two minds touching through the noise. Hello, he thought. We see you too. On the ridge, Rena had lowered her hand from her weapon entirely. She was listening to the signal coming through her communicator. The tonal pattern the human vessel had transmitted. Clear and clean and strange. Her signals officer, a careful young man named Baekhyun, who had a gift for pattern recognition, had caught it first and flagged it within seconds. He had run it against their threat signal library and found nothing. He had run it against their known alien communication databases and found nothing. He had looked at Rena and said very simply, "It's not a weapon signal. It's not a targeting ping. It's just a knock." Rena had listened to it 3 times. 12 beats. Pause. 12 beats. She had thought about it for a moment. Then she had said, "Send it back." Baekhyun had, and now the human vessel had responded. The same pattern again, unchanged. Not escalating, not adding complexity to try to confuse them. Just sending back the same thing, steady and patient, like someone holding a door open and waiting without rushing. Teo was standing very close beside her. His voice was barely audible. "What does it mean?" "It means they know we're here," she said. "They've probably known for a while. And they're telling us that they know without doing anything about it." She paused. "It's a good move." "Is it a move at all? Or is it just communication?" She considered that. "Both," she said finally. "The best kind always is." She looked at the human figure still standing alone in the dust below the ridge. It had not moved in over 10 minutes. It was just standing there, small and gray-suited against the white moon's surface, visible and still and completely in the open, offering no cover to itself, making no defensive preparation. A vet soldier in that position would have been reading it as either supreme confidence or complete ignorance. She was beginning to suspect it was both. Then the human moved. It raised one hand, slowly, clearly, with the kind of deliberate slowness that said, "Watch what I'm doing," and waved. Not a combat gesture, not a signal she recognized from any military vocabulary. Just a wave. The kind of thing a child did when it saw someone it recognized. The kind of thing that meant in a very simple, very physical language that didn't need a translator, "I see you." Behind her she heard Somi make a sound. Something between a breath and a word, not quite either. The young soldier was staring at the human. Teo said nothing. Rena looked at the waving human for a long moment. Then she raised one of her long-fingered hands and extended it, flat, palm facing outward. She didn't know if the human would understand it. She didn't have a way of knowing what gestures meant to them. But among the Veth, an open, flat palm facing another person meant, "I hold no weapon, I mean no harm." It was one of the oldest gestures on their homeworld. It predated their language. It predated their civilization by thousands of years. She held it up anyway. And the human 400 meters below, on the dust of Vela 9, went very still for a moment. Then it raised both of its hands, palms out, and held them up too. "It understood," Baekhyun said from behind her. His voice had gone very quiet. "Or it made the same gesture independently," Teo said. "Or," Rena said, "it did both." She stood looking at the small human figure with its both hands raised, pale gloves bright against the dark of its suit, standing perfectly still in the open under the light of a distant star. The gas giant big drum hung in the sky above it, enormous and indifferent. The moon's dust settled around the human's boots. And then the human bent its knees. Rena saw it happen and understood it, logically. In the part of her brain that processed the briefing notes her science team had sent her about human physiology and gravity response, she understood that the human was probably just shifting its weight, adjusting its stance, doing whatever small physical adjustment a creature built for a stronger gravity might do after standing still for a long time. She understood this logically. Every other part of her brain watched the human bend its knees and saw a crouch, watched it lower its center of mass, watched it coil, and then the human straightened up, too fast, weight shifting forward, knees pushing, and rose off the ground again. Not as high as the first time, only maybe 60 or 70 centimeters, but it rose, and it came forward a half step as it did, the way a jumping creature naturally does. And it came down a little closer than it had been. Closer to the ridge. The hum of pulse lances filled the air again. Not all of them this time, not the full line, but several. The soldiers nearest to Rena, who had the best angle, their instincts taking over before their discipline could stop them. Rena's hand shot up, flat. Her voice was very level, the kind of level that took 30 years to build. The hum stopped. She looked at the human below, now standing still again, hands still raised, apparently unaware that it had just been within a half-second of being the subject of a very serious diplomatic incident. Teo breathed out slowly beside her. It keeps doing that. Yes, she said. And it keeps not knowing it's doing it. Yes. She lowered her raised hand and looked at the human for a long moment. She thought about everything she had watched it do in the past hour. The casual jumping, the easy landing, the soil scanner it had swept toward them without any awareness of what it looked like. The way it moved across an alien moon like it was a walk in a park on its own world. The way it had come back out of the ship not to fight, but to stand still and be seen. A creature that didn't know it was terrifying. That, she thought, was perhaps the most terrifying kind. She clicked her communicator. Baekhyun, get me a translation relay from our language banks. Whatever we have on human contact protocols, I want it running. We're going to talk to them. Commander, our human vocabulary is incomplete. Maybe 40% coverage. That's enough, she said. 40% of a language is enough to say the most important things. She looked down at Do-hyun, standing in the pale dust, with his hands in the air, patient and still, and completely at ease on a moon surrounded by armed aliens, who had been one bad reflex away from firing on him 3 separate times in the last hour. Get it running, she said, before he decides to stretch again. Humans stepped onto a low-gravity moon. The aliens thought he was rising to attack. Part 5. Understanding and Awe. The voice that came through the speaker was rough and halting, like something being assembled from pieces that didn't quite fit together yet. But it was a voice, and it carried words, and Dehuan understood enough of them. He says, human, vessel, we speak, no fight. He stood very still and listened to it twice. Then he pressed the button on his suit comm that connected to Yuna inside the ship. Are you hearing this? I'm hearing it, she said. Her own voice was slightly unsteady. The good kind of unsteady. The kind that happened when something you had worked toward for a very long time suddenly became real. They're pulling from our shared contact language base. The one the UN compiled from intercepted transmissions. Their vocabulary coverage is limited, but they're trying. What do I say back? I'm putting a phrase together now. Keep still. He kept still. His arms were starting to ache from holding them up. He lowered them slowly, carefully, making the motion as obvious and unthreatening as he could manage. He turned both palms outward again as he brought them down, the same open hand gesture, making sure the message was clear. I'm just moving, not attacking, still here. On the ridge, Rena watched the human lower its arms and felt her shoulders drop about a centimeter. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding herself until that moment. Baekhyun put a hand on her arm. Commander, The vessel is transmitting a reply. The words came through the speakers slowly, with pauses between them, clearly assembled by someone working carefully with limited tools. We hear you. No fight. We come to speak only. She listened to it 3 times. Then she looked at Teo. He looked back at her. 40% of a language, he said quietly. 40% was enough, she said. She made her decision then. It was not the kind of decision a commander was supposed to make without consulting her council. She knew that. She also knew that there were moments when a decision had to be made in the time it took to breathe in and breathe out, and that hesitating past that moment could change everything in the wrong direction. She had been in enough of those moments to recognize this one. She took her weapon from her belt. Every soldier on the ridge went rigid. She handed it to Teo. He held it and looked at her, and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. He held the weapon and watched her move to the edge of the ridge and begin climbing down toward the surface. If this goes badly, she said, without looking back, you are in command. Do not fire unless fired upon first. Understood, he said. His voice was very steady. She was proud of him for that. The path down from the ridge was rough and steep, and she took it carefully, her long fingers finding holds in the dark rock. The moon's low gravity helped. She felt lighter than she should, her movements easier than expected. She understood, now, in a physical way she hadn't before, what the human strange movements looked like from the outside. Even her own careful climb down the ridge was slightly floaty, slightly strange. The way her body naturally overcompensated for gravity that wasn't fully there. She thought, if I look strange moving in this gravity, how strange must the human look to eyes that have never seen a creature built for a much stronger pull. She reached the bottom of the ridge and walked out onto the pale dust. The human was still standing where it had been. It had turned to face her, tracking her movement down the ridge. She could see it clearly now, the full details of it. Smaller than a Veth by almost a full head. 2 arms, 2 legs. The suit it wore was plain and gray, with markings she couldn't read. The helmet visor was dark, so she couldn't see its face. She stopped when she was about 10 meters away. They looked at each other. Then the human lifted one hand and did the small, loose wave again. The one that had no parallel in Veth communication vocabulary. No military meaning, no ceremonial significance, no reference in any database her linguists had searched. Just a wave. Something small and certain and unmistakable. Hello. She raised her own hand, palm flat and open, in return. And then from inside the human ship, the translation relay crackled to life again. Yuna had been listening and watching through the suit camera, and she had been ready. The words that came through were simple, assembled carefully, the best that 40% of a shared vocabulary could manage. Human name, Dohun. We come from far. We find you. We are glad. Rena listened to it. She looked at the human, at Dohun, standing in the dust of Vela 9 in front of her. She clicked her own translator and spoke slowly, letting Baekhyun's system process and convert and send. Veth name, Rena. We are here long time. We watch you come. We are, she paused, searching for the right word in a language she barely had. A word that carried the right meaning without sounding like a threat or a boast. We are careful, she said finally. You move. We do not understand how you move. There was a pause. Then Yuna's voice came through, and though Rena didn't understand the words of whatever she was saying to Dohyun, she heard the tone. Something amused, something fond. Then Dohyun looked at her, and though she couldn't see his face, his body language shifted in a way she was starting to read. The shoulders loosened, the head tilted slightly. And then he did something she had not predicted. He bent his knees. She tensed. She couldn't help it. 30 years of training, tensing her body in half a second. And then he pushed off gently, not a full jump, just a small, controlled lift of maybe 30 centimeters, and came back down softly. He pointed at himself, then at the ground, then up. Human body. Moves differently. Rena stared at him. Then she looked down at the ground, then up, then back at him. He nodded, another human gesture she had already begun to catalog. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very slowly, with the great dignity of someone who had commanded soldiers for 3 decades, and was about to do something slightly undignified in the interest of communication, she bent her own knees and pushed off gently. She rose about 15 centimeters, came back down. She looked at him. He pointed at her and did the nodding gesture again. Yes, you understand. Something happened in her chest. She would not have described it as warmth. Veth didn't typically use that word for internal states, but it was something in that direction, a loosening, a recognition. Above them, on the ridge, Teo was watching through his scope. He saw the commander jump slightly and land. He saw the human nod. He lowered the scope very slowly and looked at the soldier standing nearest to him. Somi, young and sharp, and still gripping her weapon too hard. "Stand down," he said quietly. She let out a breath she had been holding for a while. "What's happening down there?" "They're talking," he said. "I can't hear them." "Not with words," he said. He looked back down at the 2 figures standing in the dust. One tall and scaled and dark, one short and gray-suited and strange. But they're talking. It took another hour and a half before real language began to form between them. Yuno worked with Baekhyun through the translation relay, building phrases piece by piece, testing words, correcting misunderstandings, slowly expanding the shared vocabulary into something that could carry actual meaning rather than just intention. It was slow. It was one of the most important conversations in human history, and most of it consisted of single words, spoken carefully, with long pauses in between. But it was a conversation. Do-hyun stood on the surface of Vela 9 for 2 more hours after Rena came down from the ridge, and by the end of it, the sun had moved enough that the shadows on the white dust were long and blue, and Rena had called Teo down from the ridge, and 6 Veth soldiers stood in a loose watchful group nearby, and Bora and 2 other members of the